the important rituals of people's lives centered in the church. In the church, the infant was baptized, the young were married, and prayers were offered for the souls of the dead.
The tremendous outpouring of skill, labor, and faith represented in the age of Gothic cathedrals needs to be understood in the light of the great changes happening in Western Europe between 1100 and 1300. And the most important of these was a dramatic population boom. As Europe grew more stable and more prosperous, men and women seemed to have married younger and had bigger families. As a result, the population of the West increased threefold in those 2 centuries, and in the richest parts, up to tenfold. Hundreds of new towns were founded, and the old ones thrived as local and long-distance trade flourished. At the same time, there were new intellectual impulses, evidenced best of all in the founding of the great universities, Paris, Oxford, and Cambridge. And inside the church, great scholars, such as Peter Abelard, attempted to wrestle afresh with those eternal problems of the relationship between the rational and logic and faith. So everywhere, there was a sense of change.
Nowhere is this sense of change revealed more dramatically than in architecture. In a drab suburb of Paris, at the Church of Saint-Denis, once the glorious burial place of the kings of France, we can pinpoint the moment of transition to the new visionary Gothic style.
It's very rare in the history of Western architecture when we can see a new style born in a new place in one monument at a very specific moment in time. But such is the case here, where for the very first time the Gothic style was created.
William Clark is an art historian who has made new contributions to our knowledge of Saint-Denis and Chartres.
The new style of architecture is characterized by these tall, thin columns, their foliage capitals that lift up the now even ceiling height, a network of pointed arches and ribbed vaults. These things had been used before, but what's new, indeed unique here at Saint-Denis, is the new sense of the organization of the space. The divisions are now played down in favor of an overall unified space that flows from one side of the building to the other. The differences from Romanesque architecture are clear. Romanesque architecture had massive, heavy, thick walls and divided spaces. Here at Saint-Denis, the divisions between units, like the walls between the radiating chapels, have simply disappeared in favor of this vast expanse of space that seems to float around us. And it's filled with light. The wall, as a surface, has disappeared and has been replaced by translucent screens of glass.
All this was due to the influence of one of the most extraordinary people in 12th century France, the man who conceived the new building, Abbot Suger of Saint-Denis. Suger believed that the light flooding the choir through the stained glass windows becomes divine light, a revelation of the Spirit of God. Thus it was possible, he said, to create in a church a strange region of the universe suspended between earth and heaven. Suger also placed gold and jeweled objects everywhere in his church, for these too were felt to reflect the divine light. In June 1144, Suger consecrated the new choir at Saint-Denis in the presence of the King of France, his nobles, and the chief archbishops and bishops. Dazzled by what they saw, they returned home inspired to equal or even outdo Suger's creation. Reims, Sens, Senlis, Soissons, Beauvais, Canterbury, and Chartres would soon show the influence of the new Saint-Denis.
The medieval cathedral was the focus of popular pride and intense rivalry, for the prestige and importance of a town was determined to a large extent by the size and height and beauty of its cathedral. This rivalry pushed church spires to unprecedented heights. The spire of Chartres would extend beyond the top of a 30-story skyscraper. A 40-floor skyscraper would be needed to surpass the spire at Strasbourg. The dimensions of the cathedral at Amiens made it possible for the entire population of the city, some 10,000 people, to attend one ceremony. But it was in the height of the vaulting that the most intense competition reigned. When the vaulting of Notre Dame in Paris achieved a height of 108 feet, Chartres rose 121 feet above the ground. Reims then surpassed this with 125 feet. Next, Amiens rose 139 feet. Finally, Beauvais Cathedral, which would have beaten them all with a vault of 158 feet, went beyond the limits of safety and medieval engineering skill, and the walls of the choir collapsed. Despite isolated disasters like Beauvais, Gothic triumphed over much of Europe within a few generations. At Canterbury, when the choir was destroyed in the Great Fire of 1174, it was rebuilt in the new Gothic style. England was the first to adopt the Gothic. Not surprising in a country with close dynastic and historical links with France. But English architects always tended to go their own way, favoring length over height, evolving their own forms, often by deliberately misinterpreting their French models. By the early 14th century, at Wells Cathedral, the deep-rooted English tendency toward architectural fantasy broke free, producing daring innovation. Most striking and eccentric are the massive strainer arches added to reinforce the supports of the crossing tower. And that most notable of English contributions to Gothic, the elaborately patterned vault with its delicate tracery of stone.